The nonprofit MBA purpose is to provide new business insights and fresh creative ideas for executive directors and their teams that will help them improve their organization. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik, and I will be your host for today's Nonprofit MBA podcast. I am co-founder of Financing Solutions, and Financing Solutions is the leading provider in the United States for the past 12 years in lines of credit for small nonprofits. If you are interested in learning more about getting a line of credit, please visit our website at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. Again, that's nonprofitmbapodcast.com. And today's sponsor, and we also have him as a guest on today's podcast as well, is Araize Fast Fund Online, which is a cloud-based system that seamlessly integrates nonprofit fund accounting, fundraising, and payroll in a single solution. I'm a firm believer that you should get software that's specifically built for your industry. And Araize is, accounting software that is specifically made for nonprofits. In fact, I'm on the board of two nonprofits, and one of the nonprofits I'm on the board with just switched to Araize. So, we're a big proponent of it. If you're interested in learning more, please visit their website at araize.com. It's ARAIZE.com, or you can call them at 866-840-7449. Today's topic is fundraising for newer nonprofits that haven't raised much money yet. And our guest, of course, is the CEO of Araize, Joseph Scarano. And again, we've kind of gotten into what their software does, but Joe is also an inactive CPA, and has spent over 40 years providing accounting services and software to the nonprofit industry. He also has served on numerous nonprofit boards as treasurer. Joe, welcome again to your fourth time you've been on the Nonprofit MBA podcast.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate you having me. And hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well.
Yeah, so we're going to jump right into today's topic, which is fundraising for newer nonprofits. What have you, we're going to jump right into it. What have you seen with the issues in relation to nonprofits that haven't started going the fundraising route?
Well, we deal with all sizes, types, and varieties of nonprofits, and quite a few startup nonprofits. Someone has an idea to start a nonprofit, whether it's a social service-based nonprofit, animal welfare, environmental, ecological, ecology, or education. And unfortunately, some really have no idea how they're going to keep their nonprofit up and running. If they're relatively small, typically their initial funding stream is themselves. They'll throw money into the nonprofit. They don't have any employees, so there's not a lot of expenses to cover. But if they want to start a mission where whatever their mission is, it takes resources. And so anyone who's starting a bit, whether it's a regular business or a nonprofit, you need to establish a business model, a business plan. And, for nonprofit professionals, identifying funding sources and deciding, what types of funding models they're going to pursue is probably the most challenging task to get them up and running. So, they really have to have a really good understanding of, number one, what is the need for the nonprofit that they are starting? If there's a really desperate, dire need for the services that they're going to provide as a nonprofit, they should be able to find good sources of funding. So, any business, whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit, you need financial resources, to stay in business. So nonprofits obviously are not any exception to that rule. Even if you have 100% volunteers, there are some expenses that you're going to incur. So you need to have funding to cover those expenses. Friends and family donations coming. That could cover some initial costs, but before you anyone who's starting a nonprofit, before you even get started, you need to establish what is your funding model. Where are you going to get the funds necessary to fulfill your mission, to be successful? There are multiple funding, models to choose from, and it all boils down to the communities you're in, the available resources you have, and how aggressive you're going to be. It even in a nonprofit, it takes a certain amount of moxie in when it comes to selling your services. You need to sell to your prospective funding sources on the mission that you're going to provide, whether it's individual donors, whether it's foundation grants, corporate grants, or government grants. So first thing to do is define your funding model. Where is your funding going to come from? And so, that there are multiple resources for funding. You've got again, individual donations, fundraising events, a bake sale, a cookie sale, lemonade sale. We have a nonprofit who started out with their daughter selling lemonade to benefit a specific nonprofit in the area. And now they've grown to a chain of lemonade stands around the city, specifically funding this one nonprofit.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, again, with being aggressive, having a good message, communicating to the community the work that you're doing, that in and of itself can help your funding model.
Yeah. I mean, let's use. Well, let's repeat what you're saying too. I mean, so how do you raise money, right? So let's be more clear. There is private donations, okay,
Mm-hmm.
where
It
and
usually
there's
starts with friends and family.
right friends and family. It's the same thing with any for-profit business too, right? So you go friends and family, you raise. Let's just say this one angle is smaller amounts of money. The other angle is you get a big donation, a big benefactor to give you a larger amount of money, right? Now the next one is grants, right? And just keep in mind, grants take years to win, okay? Because they don't want to fund a brand new nonprofit. They want you to show that you are established, that your processes and procedures are there, that you have a track record of serving people. That's important to them. And learning how to fill out a grant application and how to win them is a skill in itself. Then there are major fundraising events. There's not just like what Joe said, a bake sale, but there are, having I went to a very large one. I'm on a board of two nonprofits. One of my nonprofits is an $8 million nonprofit, and their gala was huge. I mean, unbelievable. I couldn't believe how well run and how much money it made. So there's that. There is kind of, I would tell you, forget about loans. Okay. The government doesn't give you loans. Okay. And even an organization like my company, Financing Solutions, you got to have some cash flow before we're going to give you a line of credit, and that would be the responsible thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, there are a few other creative things, but one of the things I've noticed, Joe, it is that there are often two types of founders. There's the founder who is really good on this service side of trying to help their cause. So they really believe in what they're doing, and they're really great on helping people, or whatever it is that they're trying to do. And then there are the other ones who are really, really good at raising money. And, unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits that start are ones that the executive director, the founder, isn't really good at raising money. And either
Hmm.
they have to learn that skill set, which they don't often like to do, or the nonprofit fails. Because you can't, at a very young nonprofit, go out and hire somebody and say, you're in charge of fundraising. It's
Because that takes
just,
money.
it takes money. And honestly, it is, if you're talking about the difference between serving your cause or raising money, you do more for your organization by raising money than you do by serving the people or the cause that you're trying to serve.
Yep. Yeah, the money
And
comes first.
yeah, and you got to be a go-getter. You have to be a go-getter to get that big donation, to do those big fundraising events, to get to the another side, which is grants, which is working with state and local government, federal government, those type of things. It's a real skill set, isn't it?
It is. It is. And a lot of nonprofits are guilty of uh, trying to build their nonprofit with a single revenue stream. And you really need diverse revenue streams. Fundraising is usually the start. Private fundraising events, it is usually a good avenue to get started. But from there, you you need to diversify. As you said, getting grants is a long-term process. It's not it You can't just start a nonprofit and expect to receive a grant. Again, unless it's from friends or family. Someone who works for a large corporation. That corporation might have a foundation, and you're fortunate enough to know the right people to get the money. But the really the key thing is, it creating your funding model is really a multi-step process. You can't just wing it. You really have to build a plan, build a business plan like any other business would. And that business plan is going to be key to your success.
Yeah.
So number one is plan your revenue, plan your sources of revenue. You can't be reactive. You have to have a specific plan in place on a year-to-year basis on how you're going to raise funds. You then have to establish a budget. You need to know how much money you need to raise. You just can't throw out a number. Well, we'll be fine if we raise $10,000 for the first year when your expenses are 20. That you won't last very long if you can't cover all of your expenses. So a lot of people think, well, you're a nonprofit, you can't make money. Well, that's actually it's the opposite of that, because if you don't make money, you can't fulfill your mission. So the mission of a nonprofit is not to be running at deficits. The mission of a nonprofit is to be running at excesses every year, where you have enough resources from year to year. So ideally, if you plan, a budget for the first year and your budget is only 25,000, you want to raise 50,000. And that way you have enough in the bank in your reserves and your net assets for 2 years. The next year you raise another 50,000. And as you raise that money year to year, your expenses are going to increase because your services are going to increase. So you want to plan, you want to build your budget knowing how much money you're going to need to operate effectively. And again, there's multiple streams of revenue, trying to figure out how much money you're going to need to be successful. And then of
Yeah.
course, go ahead.
Well, I was going to tell you, so the one of the boards, one of the nonprofits I'm on, so they had never, they've been around for several years. They had an all volunteer, I'm being generous here, but the all volunteer board, all volunteer staff, right? And they they what they do is they collect. Let me go reverse. They give away Halloween costume to kids who can't afford it. And for those of you who say uh, who can't afford it, 90% of their kids are in foster care. Okay, and they do it throughout the United States. So they, in most cases, collect used costumes, and then they get them over to the kids. They give the kids three choices. It's a great cause. They've given away about 1,500 costumes a year, but they've never raised money before. And so this past year, I got them to start raising money, right? And we were able to raise $10,000, right? And the executive director thought that was a lot of money. Like she thought, wow, this is really a lot of money. Now, what we did with that money was we used it to buy new costumes because it was easier from a logistical standpoint, sometimes at late notice, to get kids costumes that were new and not have to deal with the logistics of getting it there. So, so when I made her aware that was hardly any money at all, you know, to a layman who hasn't run a business or a nonprofit, $10,000 doesn't go very far, right? Again, this is an all volunteer board, but the eventual goal is for the executive director to do this full time, and you're not going to do that on $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm trying to turn her attention. They're down in New Orleans. I'm saying is, you should really start thinking about having a big gala, a big costume gala, just like the one I talked about. My other nonprofit that I'm working with is doing, right? So the point of me doing this is illustrating that the key to a nonprofit is raising money, right? Not so much about the people you serve. Unfortunately, it becomes a money driven organization. The more money you can get, the more people you can help. Is that has been your experience too, Joe?
Oh, of course, because as I mentioned, being a nonprofit doesn't mean that you don't need money. Being a nonprofit is just an IRS designation for your business that you don't have to pay income taxes on what are perceived as profits. But for a nonprofit, profits are not profits that are taxable. Profits are resources that are reinvested for the nonprofit to use in future fiscal years. So, with your friend who started the nonprofit to provide costumes for underprivileged kids, they start with raising funds, take with from family and friends, and then from there they say, okay, we were successful this year. How do we expand that? Because we don't want to just limit ourselves to a small community that we could help. We want to try to expand. The same
Yeah.
thing with the lemonade stand. They were doing well with one lemonade stand, raising thousands of dollars, but then they said this idea, we could expand on this idea. So with the help from the community, help of resources, they were able to expand, and not knowing what their financial situation is, but they're bringing in much more money, which enables them to provide a greater diversity of services to larger communities, and it just keeps expanding. So you really need to think like an entrepreneur. Being a owner of a nonprofit, more than anything else, you're an entrepreneur to make that business successful.
Let's talk about the business plan that you've mentioned a couple of times. And you some key elements in it. You don't have to make it a huge, big 20-page document, right? You start off by at least identifying who you're going to be serving first.
Mhm.
What's
You
the
have your
mission?
mission statement.
What's your mission
Your-
statement, right?
right.
And it should be very concise. Let's be clear. Should not be a paragraph. It should be very simple. Number two is you should probably, this isn't any order, right? You should probably start putting together a budget of what you're going to need, right?
Mhm.
Based on your initiatives. Maybe that's another part about it. Under the mission statement, you want to put some of the initiatives, some of the things that you want to accomplish in your first year, your second year, and your third year, right? And then comes the budget. You saying based on those initiatives, you want to say, okay, this is how much money I'm going to need for this, right? And then the next thing is how are you going to raise the money? What's your plan, right? And this is the other thing I learned because I have built a number of companies myself. Is you don't we are all overly optimistic when it comes to looking at our own business plan. And sometimes you need somebody to poke holes at that and say, this isn't realistic. All right. And sometimes you'll have a founder or an owner who'll say is I'm going to do it. And that's all there is to it. But that's fine. You still want that naysayer to tell you I'm skeptical. How are you going to do this? It'll force your business plan to get better. And then, of course, comes to the fundraising. Okay, this is how we're going to raise the money that we're going to need. And then you start getting into a little bit more details about those fundraising events or fundraising initiatives and how you're going to accomplish those things. What am I missing, Joe?
Well, you really need to think. This is kind of a cliche, but kind of think out of the box. Think about, there's a lot of competition for donor funds. If you're doing private donations, outside of your circle of family and friends, people are getting bombarded all the time to make donations to nonprofits. So what are you going to do to make your message stand out? And once you've established your mission statement and established your budget, then you need to explore and brainstorm how we're going to execute this. And so it does take a little bit of creativity. It takes a lot of moxie. It takes salesmanship and persistence in order to fulfill. So you hit all the right points on how to organize, but then the execution is really where that's what separates the successful from the unsuccessful businesses as a whole, and then nonprofits as a subset of a business.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I've seen is the first couple of years, it really comes down to willpower, right? It really is about a consistent, incredible effort. And it's so easy to say that in the beginning, right? Oh, I'm going to work as hard as I can. I'm going to put 100 hours in a week, but try doing that for 6 months, a year, and when you're getting lots of no's, and how frustrating it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, you, I see it all the time that we get calls at Financing Solutions from people say, I have this great idea for a nonprofit, but all I need is money to start it. And and so, they're not
That
going to get
that's
it
a
from it.
that's
Yeah.
an that's a understatement. All I
Yeah.
need is money to start
To start
it.
it. Right. And so you have to understand that the skill set that you have to run a nonprofit and also to build a for-profit company, you will never not have to have that skill of being able to find money. It is, it's like a rite of passage to building a nonprofit. That becomes, when you are running your nonprofit, that becomes 90% of the executive director's job. And everybody else is serving your cause, but you are, as the executive director, going to need to always be raising money. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that's what it happens. And I see it all of the time with the executive directors. And yes, like at every different revenue stage in your organization, your skill sets will change, and as you continue to get past maybe 2 million in revenue a year, you are then starting to work a little bit more on the nonprofit instead of in the nonprofit. And that's a nice thing, instead of having to do everything, because it's well known that executive directors, co-founders and executive directors, which is often the same thing, they're working crazy hours to get the job done, right?
Oh yes, yeah, yeah. It's nonprofit is not easy work, and even though this whole discussion is about money, it typically you're starting a nonprofit not for the money, but ironically, without the money, you can't start your nonprofit.
Yeah. Now, I also
No,
want to,
no one's going into the nonprofit business to get rich.
right. I would also say this too. The um, executive directors that I know who are very, very successful um, are often they're autodidactic, they're self-taught. So they're constantly learning. I mean, that's why I tell people to listen to the Nonprofit MBA podcast. I mean, like I
Mhm.
have incredible guests. I mean, 450 episodes. It's like going to a lecture, to really listen to some great people. And that's a good way to start. Start listening to a lot of the podcasts, because you're really going to start learning the vernacular. That you're really going to start learning industry terms. You're going to start getting ideas, and the more educated you are, the better you're going to be at what you do.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. Exactly.
What do you
Yeah. It's
see? What do you see the difference? The people that come to your software, which by the way is very inexpensive to start off with, but when people come to you, what do you notice about the nonprofits that succeed and the ones that don't?
succeed really care about their finances. They want to know what is my financial position. They want to be able to they this is the funniest thing I hear all the time. I just want to press a button and know exactly where I stand financially. It's a little bit more than just pressing a button, but they care. They obviously they care about their mission, but more importantly, they care about their fiscal position. Where are they fiscally? Those are the ones that typically succeed because they know without the finances, they're not going to succeed. Whereas the ones that don't care about their finances, then they typically don't get very far because they have no idea what their financial position is. They don't know that they're losing money. They don't know that they have to raise more money. They don't know that they can't expand the services that they're providing because they don't have the resources for it. So the ones that are successful are they're the entrepreneurs in the nonprofit industry. They're the ones that understand business modeling, they understand planning, they understand execution, and they understand what it takes to properly manage and run a nonprofit, which, it all comes down to having enough resources, whether those resources are donated, in kind contributions, getting a lot of volunteers to buy into your mission and volunteer their time, or getting money, identifying what are going to be our funding streams to keep the nonprofit going, and making sure those funding streams are sustainable from year to year to keep the business going.
Yeah, I'm going to leave this We've kind of out of time. I'm going to leave this podcast on a positive note, though. There's a lot of money out there. There is just a lot of money, and you just need to get a person's time. Because I mean, you say people are getting solicited all the time, but you know, not as much as you think. Not as much. There's not People don't give as much money as they should. And I know, like, my organization gives 10% of our profits to nonprofits. So we and but I there's a lot of money out there, and And you just need to be able to, like you said earlier in this podcast, be able to get in front of them, create some what's going to make you stand out, unique. Because by the way, that costs a lot of money. So just keep that all in mind. So Joe, I'll let you have your last words before we kind of close this all out.
Sure, sure. So, it all comes down to, thinking through what your funding streams are going to be, defining your sources. It's going to help your organization, better position itself, to attract, additional funding, increasing your funding streams, diversifying your funding streams. And this is going to ensure your long-term sustainability as a nonprofit and, increase the impact you have on the community.
Great. Yep, I agree. All right. Well, it's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank so very much Joseph Scarano from Araize for coming on today's podcast. That's Araize, ARAIZE.com. And if you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend and also subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. If you liked today's podcast, please also give us a review, 5-star review. It really helps us get the word out. The Nonprofit MBA podcast right now is in the top 3% of listened to nonprofit podcasts in the United States. And those reviews really help us. If you are looking for a line of credit for your nonprofit also, you can give us a call at 862-207-4118 or visit our website at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. Joe, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Go to our website, Araize, ARAIZE.com, or send an email to sales@araize.com.
Great. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and so I want to thank all of you for our listeners for doing all the heavy lifting of trying to make the world a better place. We certainly need it. There are a lot of problems out there, and you guys are out there on the front lines really making a big difference, and I thank you for that. I know Joe does too. I know Joe and I are doing our own part in our own way, but you're out there every single day, and I thank you. I just want to remind you, you're not good to your family, your employees, your cause, even yourself, if you don't take good care of yourself first. I know you often might think of others first, but you need to think of yourself first, and then you can help everybody else after that. So make sure you're taking good care of yourself. You're eating right. You're sleeping right. We all know the right things to do, but we rarely prioritize them. So please make sure you do a good job of that. We need you. And other than that, I want to thank you for listening to the Nonprofit MBA podcast, and have a great day.